people will come. I have the lesson plan, so if you will take one and pass it around, and then just put the extras right here, we can go ahead and get started. Woo. I'll wait till everyone gets a lesson plan before we begin.
Are people afraid of turning
Did y'all have a good weekend?
I had a busy one.
Yeah.
We had the first day at new job, so that was
Exciting.
My mother was visiting.
All right, so if anyone else comes in, we will pass them one of these. Okay, so everyone now has been writing creative nonfiction. Whether you were a part of group 1 or were in class last week, you have had some experience writing creative nonfiction. So, that being said, what has your experience been so far with creative nonfiction? I guess more specifically, what did you like about writing creative nonfiction so far?
Harder
It's harder?
compared to creative writing, like pulling out of your imagination, kind of like feel. For me, it's harder.
Creative nonfiction is harder? Okay.
I didn't like it as much. I'm more of a head in the clouds kind of person, and I'd rather not think about reality.
Okay. So things that you liked about creative nonfiction.
I find it easy to draw from reality than augmented.
Okay, great. So it's easy to draw from reality because we already know what happens. So you have kind of the basis of the story, but you can augment, like Graham said, the style, or you can frame it creatively then. Pretty good, right?
Thank you.
Okay, what else did you like about writing creative nonfiction? Nothing? Does anyone have anything else that they liked about it?
I liked it, but I don't really know why. Like,
Okay.
I don't know.
All right, that's fair. Well, what techniques did you employ or try to employ while you were writing, either in class or group 1 has had some formal experience writing their creative nonfiction piece for workshop. So what kind of techniques have you been employing that you've learned about so far?
Turns,
Turns? Great.
it's hard because it's real life, so.
Yes, so turns, you know, the unexpected thing that happens, Oliver is saying it's hard because, well, you can't make it up. You can't just say, I need something exciting to happen here. What other techniques are you using?
Going home.
Going cold? Great. Graham, did you have one?
Sensory details.
Sensory details, very important in the scene making of creative nonfiction.
We use some dialogue in that.
Yes, that's really important too. Scene, dialogue, action dialogue. You guys are getting really good at this, but today we're going to be focusing on exposition in just a little bit. So, a couple more questions on creative nonfiction. How similar or how different is writing creative nonfiction to fiction or poetry?
You have to maintain your truth in fiction when anywhere else you pretty much do whatever.
Exactly. So that is one difficult aspect. You have to maintain your truth. You have to be ethically fair by maintaining your truth as the nonfiction writer. So that's definitely a difference between creative nonfiction and fiction. Any ways that you see the two as being similar?
They still both tell, both very creative, tell interesting stories regardless.
Yeah, they're both creative, which means they are using the craft elements that we are discussing. Like, what are some that overlap between fiction and creative nonfiction?
Significant detail.
Significant detail.
Because yeah, you can imagine, something detailed. You can describe what you imagine, and you can also describe what you remember in
Mhm.
better detail as well. So that's why.
Exactly, really using your camera work and showing what's there. Any other similarities?
Point of view.
Point of view, definitely. We have first person, second person. A lot of creative nonfiction will employ the second person point of view by saying, you do this, you do that, you do that, and that can be very effective, and that's also used in fiction a lot.
Turns as well.
Yep, definitely
That's what it's
turns.
for.
Could you pass this down to Victoria, please? Thanks. Okay, and some of you have already answered this question, but what was the most difficult part about writing creative nonfiction? And again, anyone can answer this. Group 1 has formally written their creative nonfiction piece for workshop, but everyone who was in here last week got to try the braided essay too. So, what was difficult about creative nonfiction for you? Remembering,
Especially dialogue.
especially dialogue.
I feel like just coming up with an idea is hard,
Yeah.
especially if you don't do anything.
Well, that goes back to the other thing we talked about, how small moments can be the most interesting. So you might think, I have nothing to write about, or I'm too young to write memoir, or nothing really interesting has happened to me, but that's not true. I think a lot of really small details are very interesting to readers. Things that you think are normal or insignificant, people would find really interesting if you do it well, if you employ action, dialogue, and exposition, which is something that we'll talk about today. Any other comments you all have on creative nonfiction so far, going into this section?
It makes me nervous because I know that everyone that's gonna read it knows that it's actually like true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a big fear with nonfiction, but if it's important enough and you want to write about it, then that's kind of a risk that you have to take, and we'll kind of go into that today as part of exposition. Is this danger factor or this section of nonfiction being kind of hard to walk? So we can get into exposition now, and I'd like to know if anyone already has a familiarity with exposition in creative writing. Cayenne?
Well, I guess this is more of as an observer of creative writing and fiction in general, but if you don't have exposition, you leave the reader rather clueless, and I find that it's a very big and important part. Even if you do have exposition, if you do it poorly, there's not a lot going on.
Okay, so if you could define exposition a little bit for classmates who are new to it, what would you define it as?
An introduction to the setting, the scene, and the people involved.
Okay, great. Benjamin, do you have an idea of exposition?
General ideas and abstract concepts that you're trying to get across.
Mhm.
Like when we were talking about how every character is run by desire, that could be more or less exposition.
Yep, great. So we're talking about ideas, and we're talking about theories or things that are not action and dialogue happening with the characters right now. It's what the characters might be thinking about. It's their inner dwellings. It's their inner yearnings. That's kind of a brief description of exposition too, but there are actually 3 really important types of exposition that we'll look at today. So the next thing I have for you are those 3 types. And while this is going around, I'll put them up on the board too so you can see a little bit bigger. There you go. So the first one is the exposition of secrets. second is the exposition of speculation. And the third is exposition of higher understanding. Alright, so everyone has a copy now. Alright, Hannah, can you read the first one, the exposition of secrets, please?
We turn to CNF for Moment of Secret. This is what's hardest to say. This is what makes the writer most vulnerable. This is the secret yearning of the narrator. It's not anything you would tell someone, but you do. But this is also dangerous. People will critique your life. There are personal secrets, family secrets, and cultural secrets. It needs to have a risk, but write it from the vantage point of love and understanding, never revenge.
Okay. So that's kind of a lot, right? There are, within the exposition of secrets, there are 3 different kinds of secrets. We know there's danger involved in revealing secrets, but we also know that this is one of the draws for creative writing. Why would you read creative nonfiction? Like, you as a student, why would you care at all to go to brevity.com on your break from work on your smartphone and read a story of creative nonfiction? What do you go there for?
A different perspective.
A different perspective? Definitely. Would you say that you go to creative nonfiction for the secrets? Like, this is true, so I'm gonna find out what happened to this person. It kind of makes it a little more interesting, right? If you know it's true.
I mean, I don't know these people.
You don't know the people. But still, sometimes creative nonfiction is very relatable because of exposition. Because the writer is revealing a secret, putting something on the table that maybe you could relate to. And this is kind of one of the main parts of creative nonfiction, this higher understanding and this relating to other people, other readers. A good creative nonfiction piece will relate to other readers, and it will make the story about not only the writer, but about the readers too. So sometimes revealing secrets can be a way to begin this relationship with the reader by putting something on the table that was hard to share. And there's an example here by Stephen Cusito from his memoir, and it says, "I wished my sister was dead until she was." So you wouldn't tell your family that. You wouldn't tell necessarily your friends that. You might write that down somewhere for yourself, but that is a secret that this writer probably had not told anyone else, but they chose to tell their readers in their memoir. So, creative nonfiction doesn't ask for all of the gory details, but it asks for your best whiskey. It asks for you to bring something that means something to you to the table, something that you wouldn't tell just anyone. This is kind of an example of the exposition of secrets. Alright, so number 2 is the exposition of speculation. This is a really interesting one. Lindsay, would you read this, please?
This kind utilizes a what-if factor. It utilizes a tool of fiction. This is related to the craft element negative-positive space, or writing what didn't happen. It asks and answers, what if we took a different path? Where would that have led? Maybe blank, perhaps blank, perhaps blank. Maybe and perhaps are your loophole words. You are still writing true things, but you are questioning or imagining what would have happened.
Thank you. So have you all heard of this before? The idea of a loophole in creative nonfiction, the maybe or the perhaps tool, or is this new information? New? Okay. So there's an example of this. There is a piece of creative nonfiction called Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston, and there's a section called No Name Woman. So Maxine Hong Kingston writes about when she was a teenager living in San Francisco. She's sitting on her bed, and her mother is telling her a story about an aunt she's never met, an aunt who lived in China. And her mother explains that the aunt took her life and took her baby's life because the small village that they lived in was basically coming after them because the aunt was an adulterer and she had sinned. They were kind of coming with pitchforks and fire, like basically ready to kill the woman. So she took her life and she took the baby's life. Maxine Hong Kingston, though, she grew up in LA. She has never been to China at this point in her life. She doesn't know this aunt at all, but she wants to write this story. So she imagines, and it's perfectly okay to write a truthful thing of you imagining what happened. So if you're imagining something, that's still true, that's still nonfiction. It doesn't change what happened, it doesn't change the truth, but it gives the reader kind of an idea or an idea of what could have been. George, will you read this example, please?
Yeah, sure. Perhaps you had encountered him in the fields or on the mountain where the daughters-in-law collected fuel, or perhaps he first noticed her in the marketplace. He was not a stranger because the village housed no strangers. She had to have dealings with him other than sex. Perhaps he worked in an adjoining field, or he sold her the cloth for the dress she sewed and wore. His demand must have surprised, then terrified her. She obeyed him. She always did as she was told.
All right, do you see how perhaps and maybe are working in this to kind of create a small piece of fiction within nonfiction? This idea of speculation or this exposition of speculation utilizes a tool of fiction, which is creating another world. Because she didn't know what happened, but she's imagining it. So you can do this in your writing. If you wanted to know what someone in your family was like but you had never met them, you could say, maybe Evan was this, or maybe he was that. And by doing that, you get to paint this picture through your significant detail, your close observations. You can paint this imagined story, and it doesn't change the fact that your story is still true. You are imagining. Does that make sense? Okay. Do you all have questions so far about the exposition of speculation? Okay.
You said the speculation, you might use somebody else's perspective as like a creative non-writing or non-fiction piece.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And do you have questions about the exposition of secrets? Because we were talking about this dangerous kind of area of revealing secrets, and we briefly talked about personal secrets, family secrets, and cultural secrets. But what are those? Cultural secrets could be secrets that are things that only your culture knows, and by revealing those, that could be an issue too. And family secrets, obviously that would be an issue, potentially. And I know, Cayenne, you've asked in your response, is this okay to write about other people? Or, that's a question, and there is no one answer about what you should or shouldn't do. It's really up to you. But my rule of thumb is that you approach this from a vantage point of love and understanding and never revenge. But your life with creative nonfiction is up for critique when you say things. So you do want to be careful. You want to make sure that you are bringing something to the table with a purpose and not just for fun, but that it's adding to the human experience of the piece and the piece in general. Clear on the first two? All right, so then we have the exposition of higher understanding. Would someone like to read this one?
This is the hardest one. We don't understand why we do the things we do sometimes. This technique is comprised of moments that look for these answers. How do we know grief or love or anger? How do we know or write about these huge general things? What do they mean? Don't be afraid to pose the questions that you don't know the answers to.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this is the hardest one because this is talking about these general things like love or anger or grief. How do you write about that in a new way when you don't really know the meaning of grief or love? These are big, broad ideas. You can start to pose questions. You can pose questions in your piece. Revealing that you don't know the answers by asking questions is totally okay and encouraged. I think saying, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, can be very relatable too. And once you start to pose those questions, those will lead you to true insight. And insight is one of the craft elements on your page, and that's kind of the hardest to find sometimes. Because to gain insight, it's not like you can just say, oh, I want some insight in this piece, I'm going over to the folder in my brain where the insight lives, here it is. You don't just come to insight like that. You come to insight, individual new insight that no one else knows, that no one else has said, by writing yourself, by writing through these questions, trying to answer these questions. So the example I have is from an essay that I'm currently writing, so I'll read it. I don't know every aspect or angle of the constructs that surround feminism, the patriarchal society, and the powers that try to keep us down. But I do know that women hold power innately, that it doesn't have to be given or earned or traded, just found. So here, when I'm trying to talk about this big idea of feminism from just my individual experience, I can say I don't know every aspect or angle coming from these huge constructs, but I do know that we have power innately and that it doesn't have to be given or traded or earned, just found. So you come to that by asking yourself questions. You come to the idea of insight and the idea of exposition through saying what you don't know and through saying what you do know. Questions on exposition of higher understanding?
I don't think it was about knowing things. I thought it was more about the focus of the perspective and experience of the writer. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely about the perspective of the writer. And it doesn't have to be about knowing things, but it can just be about asking questions or asking yourself of the piece, what does this mean? How does this relate to other people? Why is this important? So trying to answer these questions about the higher understanding of what you're writing, because we're not writing this just for fun. We're not writing this just to show everyone that you went on some trip or that you did some special thing. Like, that's great, but what does that mean to me, the reader? So the higher understanding, the exposition of higher understanding will help connect the relationship between the reader and the writer. Any other questions on any of these types of exposition? Okay. Next we're going to read an essay called Pain Pays the Income of Each Precious Thing. And this is by Lina Maria Ferreira Cabeza Venegas. And she is a writer, and she's featured on Brevity. She's a nonfiction writer. So again, please pass these around and place the extras here. And this is in the current issue. In a way, it's kind of like the graded essay, which we were talking about last week, but it's different too. So we'll read this aloud once everyone has a copy. We'll take turns reading paragraph by paragraph. And I'd like you to keep your ear out or your eyes out for pieces of exposition. So if you find any, underline them. And they may not jump out at you right away, so try to look closely. They may not be in every section, but think about finding the exposition, finding these areas where the writer is musing on an idea, a theory, a possibility. So for the first paragraph, Stephanie, would you read that, please?
Like this, they drop this girl off at school. They drop this girl off at school after a visit to the dentist. Midway through the day, when all we do is throw stones at the rain, her gums are numb, so incredibly numb, she opens her mouth wide and digs her fingers into them, swearing all the while that she does not feel a thing.
All right, Hannah, would you read the next one, please?
Or like this, I hold the cat that has never liked to be held against my shoulder while you try to clip his claws. I press it down against my body like a baby full of helium and needles. It tries to wiggle out of my grasp, digs its claws deep in my shoulder and right above my ribs, climbing shoes on a mountainside, spigots on a maple tree, little itchy dots on pinpricks of red sap.
Ashley, would you read the next
Or
one?
better yet, Jesus, who looks after the garden behind my elementary school classrooms in Cali, Colombia. A man in a blue overall jumpsuit, chest hair caught in his zipper, machete hanging from an unused belt loop. He lets us call him Chichito. Beats around and harasses like so many featherless, wide-mouthed birds in nests. A ring of spinning, and chanting and begging and pleading. I don't know what it is. Until he takes the machete from his hip like a holy staff, a brass serpent, a tiger's tail. Please, and hurriedly cut sugar cane down fast. Swift, sweet, soft, sugar-soaked pulp, still sheeted in splintered stalk. Grant us, Jesus, our daily cane. One swing to pluck, another to split, and we ran swinging green stalks like swords above our heads.
Thank you, Victoria.
Like this girl, back in school after a visit to the dentist telling us her gums were numb. So incredibly numb. She opened her mouth wide and dug her fingernails into them. No thee. But it's hard to believe, and we tell her she's faking. We know that everything that hurts always hurts, and hurts right away, and sometimes for a long time after. So she reaches for a pencil. I'm not lying, she drawls, she protests. She pecks a tiny puff of graphite holes across her gums, lined with a pencil, colorblind stars on a pink sky. Cannot feel it, not at all, but we shake our heads. We say no, and no, fake it, because maybe we don't believe, or maybe we want to see what else she cannot feel. So she reaches for a stapler.
William?
Like this, my mother sang in a symmetry coffee shop. Atop the middle table, a wooden box full of her older sister's ashes. She lifts the lid and presses down on the ash-filled plastic bag. She's surprised how little is left, how through the ovens the fire. 10 years of cancer, hospitals, referrals, intubations, ambulances, electric beats, and iodine hospital hallways. 10 years awake and asleep, waiting rooms and induced comas, 1,000 needle mosquitoes on a handful of veins, 100 blood tubes clinking, a lifetime sedated and punctured, and it all fits in a box, little wooden box. So she presses down and feels something sharp in the ashes. Do you want to feel? She asks me because not everything's burned all the way through. Fingertips down on sharp bits of charred bone.
Thank you. Benjamin?
Like Chichito quietly going back into his garden, machete swinging from his hip, while we chewed through math class until the edges of the stalks made our gums bleed, and we drooled sweet sweat blood water on grid paper arithmetic. Like it won't hurt when the sugar dries up, when she doesn't wake up, unfelt sores and private scars, like my mother holding her older sister one last time while the cemetery men kicked stones at the road. A final moment before placing her ashes in the ossuary beside their father and grandfather. Her hands are on the box, her eyes are on the lid, and her voice cracks, splinters. It is pierced and piercing. No one, she says, can call you names now, Shiki. Like a girl dropped off after a visit to the dentist, opening her mouth so wide we can hear the sides crack as we stick our heads in like lion tamers. A single file line of staples above the gum line while the no vision wears off.
Thank you. Alright, so you may have been trying to listen, you may have been looking at other craft elements in the piece, but I'd like you to take a few minutes to reread quietly and try to underline any moments of exposition that you may have heard or thought you found. Does anyone still need more time? A few minutes. All right. Coming back together now. What were the areas of exposition that you found in Pain Pays the Income of Each Precious Thing?
I think I found a speculation one.
Okay.
Where
Can you read it for us?
we say no and no favor because maybe we don't believe or maybe we want to see what else she can feel. So she reads first aid.
Great. That's exactly right. That's an example of the exposition of speculation. She doesn't know what they were all thinking. She doesn't know why they were calling this girl a liar, but she speculates. She says, maybe we didn't believe her. Maybe we wanted to see just how much she couldn't feel. So this is a really powerful tool to use. Did someone find another area of exposition?
In the last paragraph, unfelt sores and private scars could be a mix between the what if and the secret.
Definitely. So the writer may not know of the unfelt sores and private scars, but she could be imagining this detail. There is another one in the fourth paragraph. Did someone find another one in that paragraph? The writer writes, "We know that everything that hurts always hurts, and hurts right away, and sometimes for a long time after." I would say that this is the thesis of this piece, because she's writing on pain. She's writing about these different moments of pain. And who is the we then when she says, we know that everything hurts, that hurts always hurts? Who is the we?
The kids talking to her?
Could be the kids talking to her. Could also be us, the readers. I think so. So in that way, by doing that, by using this kind of authority, she is saying, we all know that everything that hurts always hurts, that it doesn't go away. She's, through her authority, saying that we all know this. Like, you know what I know. We're all on the same team. We all get this. by doing that alone, by using that person alone, she is relating to the reader and becoming more connected to her reader. If you have questions about paying pays or other comments about this piece? Okay. So the next thing that I'd like you to do is take out the braided essay that you were working on last class. And this should be in your journal. All right, so once you've got your braided essay out, do you still have your braided essay?
Like, yeah, it's right here, but
Okay.
I can find my copy in my journal later.
Yes. It was a braided essay of your choice. The topic was your choice. All right, so once you've got your braided essay out, once you've got your braided essay out, I'd like you to reread it briefly. Look for areas of exposition. Remember, there's the exposition of higher understanding, the exposition of speculation, and the exposition of secrets. I'd like you to see if you can add at least one of these in somewhere in your braided essay. Yes?
I thought we only did the brainstorming for it. Like we only did a web.
Yeah, so some of you may have just done the web, and some of you may have progressed on to doing the braided essay. So we can spend a little bit more time than if you don't have a braided essay started. You can start from your brainstorming activity, the braided essay, and incorporate exposition in it. If you already have started on your braided essay, you can incorporate the exposition in. So I'll give you 10 to 15 minutes. I will start the timer. And after, I would like everyone to share at least one sentence or one or two sentences where they're using exposition in their braided essay. No. This is just your writing time, and then after we'll share pieces of exposition from the braided essay. Any other questions?
Because I wasn't here already, should I do the brainstorm?
Sure. So since you weren't here, you can, everyone else should get started, but Victoria, think of a theme. You've read swimming now, so you kind of understand what a braided essay is. So pick a theme, swimming, dating, moving, whatever, and from that theme, use spokes to designate different memories that surround that theme. And then you'll write in segments like Joel Peckham did in swimming.
Yeah.
And while you do this, try to employ exposition. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Please, this is a quiet one-on-one assignment.